The streets were deserted except for the Cassidy family's car. The Leviathan unit member had overheard Nate's exchange with the guards at the entrance of the hotel. After Stephen contacted him, he'd disguised himself and waited in the shadows of an adjacent building, watching over the main entrance. It was late, but Nate and his subordinates had left the hotel past curfew. The mercenaries weren't with them, so it couldn't be a fight. The Leviathan unit member resisted the urge to track them. He had to focus on his mission from Stephen. He glanced up at the hotel. Most rooms had their lights off, but some were still lit. Through the window, he saw someone sitting cross-legged on the bed, seemingly in a meditative state. No matter how much he hid his aura, cultivators from the Elysian realm would be able to sense him, so he'd adjusted his cultivation to the same level as the royal guards to blend in. With so many guards on patrol, he couldn't be out of place. At 2 o'clock in the morning, the ice dragon arrived on the outskirts of the royal city and transformed into a young man dressed in white. Flying would attract too much attention. He made his way to the hotel under the cover of the night. After several twists and turns, he finally met up with the Leviathan unit member. "What's the situation? Can we sneak in?" The Leviathan unit member shook his head. The mercenaries were cultivating in the hotel. Once they entered a meditative state, they didn't leave for hours or even days. Stephen was in a rush, and they needed to complete the mission before dawn. "The only way I can think of is to lure them out, so you can sneak in with the sample." The ice dragon rejected his idea. "No, Mr. Adams said casualties aren't allowed. I'm here to keep you and your team alive." Neither of them could figure out how to sneak in without attracting attention. As they waited in the shadows, clouds covered the moon overhead. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. Soon, a drizzle fell over the city. The squeal of tires rang out from the back door of the hotel. A truck was here to deliver fresh fruits and vegetables to the kitchen warehouse. The Leviathan unit member and the ice dragon shared a look. An opportunity bestowed by the heavens had miraculously appeared. They stayed in the shadows and crept to the back door. 2 workers were unloading the goods. The scent of fresh ingredients wafted from the boxes. "I'll put the container in one of the boxes," the Leviathan unit member said. "Mr. Adams has a good eye. He'll find it when he's here." The ice dragon gave him the glass container. "Then let's split up. I'll distract the workers. Hide near the door and wait for your chance." The ice dragon crouched behind the counter. The water on the floor, the workers' clothes, and the boxes rose into the air and turned into snow. A flurry of snowflakes drifted over the kitchen. The ice dragon was born with the innate ability to control water and ice. The natural phenomenon didn't attract the 2 workers in the room. As they pushed the trolley to the back of the kitchen, the snowflakes fell on their exposed skin. The astonishing weight and bone-chilling cold stopped them in their tracks. While they were frozen, the Leviathan unit member made his move. He vanished from the door and reappeared next to the trolley. He stuffed the glass container into one of the cardboard boxes and crossed the kitchen to the counter where the ice dragon was hiding. The snow melted, leaving subtle water stains on the floor. The 2 workers snapped out of their trance and looked around. "What just happened? I feel like my mind went blank for a second." "I don't know. I guess this is normal when we work overnight. Let's hurry up and finish unloading the truck. The sooner we finish, the sooner we can go home and catch some sleep." The Leviathan unit member let out a sigh of relief as he watched the 2 workers enter the warehouse at the back of the kitchen. He'd occasionally seen the ice dragon in human form by Stephen's side, but he'd never seen him in action. For a second, he thought the ice dragon was going to kill the 2 workers. "Those 2 aren't martial artists. How are they alive after being frozen?" "Food can be preserved in cold temperatures," the ice dragon explained. "Freezing and thawing doesn't affect the quality. What I did follows the same concept. The snow isn't harmful if it's only on them for a short time. They'll just lose a few seconds of memory." The mission was risky, and the Leviathan unit member and the ice dragon didn't stick around. They left as soon as they completed their task. In the morning, Stephen and Fiona took the earliest international flight to Cadus. They'd suppressed their auras and disguised themselves as ordinary tourists. To collect evidence, they had to hide their identities and pretend they didn't know each other. "Can this plane go any slower?" Fiona grumbled as Cadus's international airport came into view. "Think of it as a chance to enjoy the scenery. Most of the ascenders in the Elysian realm are from my world. Your ancestors were human. In a sense, that makes you human, and this is your hometown. Fiona had never thought about it like that before. She had been born into a noble family, and the Elysian realm was all she knew. Having a connection with humans was beyond her comprehension. As their flight landed, the Cassidy family's car pulled up to the hotel. Nate had spent the entire night drinking with his subordinates. The staff and customers at the bar had recognized his identity. He was the head of the Cassidy family, the CEO of the Alliance Security Company, and acquainted with the royal family. They'd wasted no time and surrounded him, showering him with endless praises. "I can't wait to expand our company to Cadis," Nate said. "It's inconvenient to open a business in the U.S. with Stephen monitoring us all the time." "The company is practically yours," his subordinate replied. "Those mercenaries don't know the first thing about running a business. They're not even interested in making money. With a few flattering words, wealth and glory will be yours." When they walked into the hotel, a guard went up to them to report the situation. A mysterious group of martial artists was attacking local gangs and disregarding the wealthy families supporting them. The martial artists were cunning and hid their identities well. They ended the fight as quickly as it started. They also didn't impose any territorial fees. Nate didn't understand their motives. Fights between gangs typically resulted in the winner taking over the loser's territory and imposing a high fee if they wanted to continue running their establishments. If the mysterious martial artists weren't imposing fees, then what was the point in starting a fight with hoodlums? "Did the wealthy families get anyone on their bad side lately?" Nate asked. "Attacking the local gangs is the same as cutting off the wealthy family's source of income." The police had been investigating the incident according to the same line of thought, but they hadn't found any leads. When businesses developed to a certain point, their priorities shifted to making a profit while maintaining a peaceful atmosphere with their competitors. After foreign businesses from the U.S. and Warhawk expanded to Cadis, the local families felt threatened and banded together for support by working on a joint development project together. Intimidating their competitors through force was an outdated method. The guard handed Nate an envelope. "It's difficult to discern their motive without sufficient leads. Please settle the issue as soon as you can. I hope this information will be of help." The guard left, and Nate went up to his room to check the photo inside the envelope. The environment was high definition, but the person who'd been photographed was blurry. No wonder the guards and the police hadn't been able to find the culprits. They didn't know what they looked like or who they were searching for. The culprits were the prisoners from Warhawk. They were strong, experienced, and skilled at hiding their tracks. Throwing the police off their tail was a simple task. Instead of attacking the entertainment establishments directly, causing a scene, and possibly ruining the business, they targeted the local gangs outside instead. Threats and simple demonstrations of their strength were enough to scare them off. With fewer people coming to work, the owners of the establishments would begin to worry about keeping their businesses open. At this time, the 9 States Financial Group would send their assistants to the establishments and offer to purchase them at low prices. With a powerful backer as their new owner, the culprits would stop their attacks, and the local gangs would soon prosper again. The prisoners and the 9 States Financial Group had been keeping a low profile, and the Cassidy family didn't have enough leads to put the pieces together. "This isn't our job, Nate. Tell the mercenaries to take care of it." "We can go with them. Cadis' cities are close to one another. It won't take too long to investigate." Nate agreed with his subordinate's suggestions. His fatigue from partying all night was replaced with enthusiasm. He went to discuss the attacks with the advisor and the alchemist's mercenaries. This was a small matter, and he couldn't bother the big shots when they were cultivating. As Stephen and Fiona's car stopped at the corner of the street, they saw Nate and a group of mercenaries leave the hotel in a rush. Judging from the direction they were headed in, they were leaving the city. The fewer people at the hotel, the easier it would be to go in unnoticed. "Where do you think they're keeping the ancient plants?" Fiona asked. "Searching every room is too time-consuming." "According to my subordinates, the mercenaries are storing them in the kitchen's warehouse. They don't keep such dangerous plants on their person," Stephen replied. The Ice Dragon and the Leviathan unit member had informed him that the plant sample had been placed in one of the boxes at the back of the kitchen. Fiona's cultivation was around the same rank as the advisor from the Thousand Hands Guild. She'd won a spar against him, but they'd been restricted by the size of the arena. If he'd gone all out, the winner wouldn't have been decided so quickly. The Ice Dragon and the Leviathan unit member had succeeded in planting evidence, but it was hard to say if finding it would be that easy. The VIP suites on the top floor of the hotel were filled with lavish furniture and decorations before the mercenaries moved in, and now they looked like they'd been ravaged by flames. The advisor and the alchemist were sitting on the bed in their respective rooms with their eyes closed. Their spiritual energy surged around them. If they weren't restraining their auras, the entire building would have collapsed. They opened their eyes at the same time and left their rooms. I sensed 2 cultivators from a higher plane. They're not one of us, the advisor observed. You know what they say, the alchemist said. The tallest tree attracts the wind. Let's go out and see who it is. He'd fully recovered from the injuries he'd sustained during the competition, and he was ready for a real battle. The 2 of them jumped off the balcony and landed at the entrance. They noticed a luxury car parked at the end of the street. The windows were tinted, but they could feel the presence of 2 cultivators inside. Stephen saw them too, and he was getting a little annoyed by all the hindrances. Fiona reached for the hilt of her sword, prepared to take action. What's the plan? They know we're here. Don't be impulsive. You're a member of the Mystic Covenant now. Your actions carry the weight of the faction. It'll cause unnecessary conflict between them and the mercenaries. So what do you want to do? Go home? Obviously not. Stay in the car. Sneak in when there's an opportunity. Stephen pushed open the car door and braced himself as he went up to the advisor and the alchemist. He had to sacrifice himself to divert their attention for Fiona to sneak into the kitchen. The Zodiac beasts were asleep in Stephen's spiritual world to recover from the spiritual energy they'd spent during the competition. He'd created a totem for them in his internal world, and the inhabitants' faith was constantly nourishing them, but he didn't know how fast it helped them recover. The alchemist's expression darkened as Stephen approached. So it's you, the famous sovereign, and the strongest martial artist in the human realm. Why are you here? I heard about your recovery, so I'm here to pay you a visit with my sincerest apologies. I hope you can forgive me for what I did during our spar. Stephen's tone was sincere, but the advisor and the alchemist were suspicious. If he were on the same side as the Bellantine family, they'd won the competition. There was no reason for him to apologize and act so submissive. The advisor and the alchemist's attention was fixed on Stephen. They'd already forgotten that there was someone else in the car. They didn't believe for a second that he was here to apologize. The alchemist suspected that Stephen was here because he had something to discuss with the royal family. You brat, who are you trying to fool? We are opening a branch in Cadis. Since you're here, why not join us for a spar? If you agree, I might accept your apology. Stephen wanted to refuse, but he spotted a strange pattern on the ground beneath his feet. The pressure in the air rose and restricted his movements. What are you trying to do? I'm preparing for our spar. You didn't object, so let's go. The alchemist grabbed Stephen's collar at blinding speed, dragging him through the air above the streets. The gentleman didn't hold grudges, but the alchemist was anything but a gentleman. Fiona was surprised to see the mercenaries acting so crudely. They had nothing to fear in the human realm, and these were their true colors. Her priority was to search the kitchen warehouse for evidence. Stephen wouldn't die that easily. He had a crowd of beasts on his side. Fiona reached out with her aura to scan the hotel. Now that the advisor, the alchemist, and Stephen were gone, there was no one of interest around. She left her car and sprinted down the street to the back of the hotel. She was so fast that she wasn't detected by the security cameras. She followed the route that Stephen had pointed out in the car and slipped through the back door into the kitchen. The warehouse at the back was lined with shelves of vegetables, fruits, and produce. It was hard to imagine that the mercenaries would hide an ancient plant in a place like this. Fiona held out her hand and released a gentle wave of energy. The boxes and ingredients hovered in the air. She inspected them up close one by one until she found a glass container. The plant inside was similar to the ancient plant at the Research Institute in Annapolis. The mercenaries weren't cultivating ancient plants. If they had a sapling in their possession, they were probably conspiring with the ancient cultivators. There were some loopholes to this theory, but Fiona trusted Stephen. She placed the container in her bag and left the hotel to save him from the clutches of the mercenaries. There was a garrison to the west of the royal city. Most of the military's elite forces were stationed out there, and they were under direct command of the king. Not too far away was an eye-catching office building with a plaque at the entrance that read, Alliance Security Company. The advisor and the alchemist took Stephen to their new branch. "What do you think of our new location?" Stephen looked up at the building. "It has a magnificent aura. You two have a talent for business. Renting an office building of this standard is too expensive in Annapolis. Opening an office here was a good idea. It's spacious and much cheaper." If the advisor and the alchemist caught the sarcasm in Stephen's words, they didn't show it. The two of them flanked his side, sandwiching him in the middle. Their gazes bore into him as they ushered him past the entrance. There was nowhere to run, and a fight was unavoidable. Injuries were expected during a spar. The mercenaries wouldn't be provoking the Mystic Covenant even if they beat him into a half-dead state. The office building was actually a training center for Cadus's martial artists. When the three of them walked past the door, countless pairs of eyes fixed on Stephen. "Don't be nervous," the alchemist said. "It's just a spar. The rules will be the same as last time. If you win, the plaque is yours. You can even take over the company if you want." "Please stop joking. The company is a result of your hard work," Stephen said modestly. "Why would I take it away from you?" From the complacent look on the alchemist's face, Stephen knew he wouldn't be getting out of this unscathed. Cadus's martial artists stopped what they were doing and gathered at the lounge, eager to watch the show. Stephen had won the competition in Annapolis, and some of them were questioning the advisor and the alchemist's strength. The pressure bore down on Stephen finally dissipated as he reached the edge of the arena. "Who will I be sparring with?" The alchemist jumped into the ring. "Me, of course." He didn't bother hiding his intention to take revenge and restore his reputation. He'd been careless during the competition. This time, he planned to go all out. He wouldn't just stand by and watch as Stephen's beasts fused. Stephen materialized his sword and circled the alchemist at the edge of the arena, waiting for an opening. The alchemist unstrapped the silver flask from his waist. Silver threads emerged from the opening and wrapped around him like armor. They were amplified by his inner energy, and a single thread could hold Stephen's sword back. With his armor of threads, there was no point in waiting. Stephen closed the distance. His blade shimmered with an aura that moved faster than the sword itself. The alchemist didn't turn around as the aura reached his back. The silver threads shifted and blocked the attack, dispersing the aura into particles of light before wrapping around Stephen's sword. He threw a blade of energy at the threads, and a shockwave swept the room. Cadus's martial artists, who were watching from the lounge in the corner, were stunned by Stephen and the alchemist's terrifying auras. Some of them sustained internal injuries from the shockwave. Stephen infused his inner energy into his sword, trying to cut through the silver threads. He couldn't break free. It was like the threads were made of an impenetrable material. The alchemist's trump card was the pills he'd refined. He carried them around in case a fight broke out. If he wasn't careless or severely outclassed, he was confident he could last several days in peak condition during any battle. "What are you waiting for? Summon your beasts. I don't have much patience." After witnessing and experiencing the power of Stephen's fusion beast, the alchemist wanted it for himself. He would kill the 12 beasts, extract their cores, and use them to refine a top-grade pill. Each beast specialized in a different attribute. If he merged their cores, he'd be able to create a one-of-a-kind cultivation pill. As for Stephen himself, his life wasn't worth anything. If the alchemist killed him and made it look like an accident during a spar, the Mystic Covenant wouldn't have much of a reaction. They wouldn't fall out with the mercenary guilds for a single member. The faction had many enemies, and they couldn't afford to make another one. Thousands of feet in the air, Fiona could see the battle in the arena through the window of the office building. There was a big gap between Stephen and the alchemist's cultivation and experience. The silver threads extended indefinitely. They were like vines of ancient plants. It wouldn't be easy for Stephen to gain the advantage. As Fiona had predicted, the alchemist easily neutralized Stephen's attacks. Stephen was forced to keep a firm hold on the hilt of his sword and dodge the silver threads at the same time. It would be over if the threads caught him. He condensed a ball of fire in his palm and aimed it at the alchemist. A flaming pillar shot into the air as an explosion erupted. It was nothing but an itch to the alchemist, but the silver threads loosened their grip, and Stephen tore through his sword out of their grasp. The explosion gave Stephen some time to catch his breath and think about how to get rid of the threads. The only reason he'd won the competition was because he'd convinced the Zodiac Beast to help him, but he couldn't send him out when they were still recovering. One of the threadworm's voices sounded in his mind. Our iron sand can stop his threads. Don't underestimate his creations. His threads are laced with inner energy. They left scratches on my sword. His threads are strong, but their numbers are limited. We have a lot more sand on our side. The threadworms were adamant about giving it a try, so Stephen gave in and agreed. They appeared in a flash of white light, coiled around him protectively. The alchemist recognized the threadworms. They weren't part of the fusion beast. He fought with them briefly during the last competition, and he'd forgotten about them. Just how many beasts did Stephen have on his side? Was he secretly opening spatial rifts connected to the Asura realm and summoning random beasts? The alchemist had many questions, but the threadworms weren't thinking about him. They condensed a storm of iron sand that swept the arena. The silver threads served as a barrier for the alchemist, but they weren't enough for him to block out the sand completely. The threadworms could control each and every fragment of metal in the sand. Once they entered the alchemist's eyes, nose, ears, and mouth, the threadworms would be able to rupture his internal organs. You have plenty of tricks up your sleeve, and you chose to summon a bunch of maggots? These weaklings won't save you, the alchemist mocked. They're not maggots, Stephen retorted. They're iron threadworms. The storm of iron sand surged violently, and in the blink of an eye, the threadworms were in front of the alchemist. He raised his flask and condensed a gust of wind to blow them out of the arena, but the threadworms weren't shaken. Some of the iron had attached to their scales, and they weighed dozens of tons. Not even an explosion would be able to displace them. The alchemist's skin stung as the tiny metallic particles in the sand brushed against him. They weren't just made of iron. Did these worms infuse high-quality ores and crystals into their sand? You're an entry-level member of the faction. Where did you get these resources? I use them for my daily cultivation, Stephen replied. It's too bad I'll have to waste them all today. The alchemist leaped back, dodging the threadworm's thrashing tails. He tossed a small furnace the size of a trinket into the air. It returned to its original size as it fell onto the edge of the arena. The fluorescent lighting in the room lost its color as the furnace flickered to life with raging flames. Stephen hadn't forgotten the alchemist's massive, ancient furnace. During the competition, its flames had absorbed the Killen's phantom. He couldn't use his fire techniques against it. That would be a waste of energy. The iron in the sandstorm melted and clattered to the floor of the arena. The alchemists were standing next to the furnace, but he wasn't affected by the heat. Fiona was blinded by the light of the furnace from where she was hiding among the clouds. The spar was getting out of hand. She hurriedly transmitted her voice to Stephen. I found evidence. Why are you fighting that old man? Are you trying to die? He forced me into the ring, Stephen replied, feeling slightly relieved that she was in the vicinity. He had to find an opportunity to forfeit. If the alchemist stopped him from leaving, Fiona would step in. The iron sandstorm continued to rage around the arena. The threadworms were swallowing the melted iron fragments on the floor and returning them back to the original state before releasing them back into the air in the form of weapons. Swords, blades, spears, and more locked onto the alchemist. As they shot toward him, they curved into an arc to avoid the furnace's flames, preparing to strike at every angle. Your worms are as weak as you, the alchemist said, leaping onto the lid of the furnace. The blazing flames swirled around him, melting the metallic weapons when they approached. Nothing had changed since the last competition. The fire in the furnace was much stronger than Stephen's. If he tried to absorb them, he would turn to ashes on the spot. The alchemist lifted his hand, and a torrent of flames shot out of the furnace. They rained over the arena with the threadworms as their target. There's nowhere to hide. When your worms burn to death, it'll be your turn. You should calm down a bit, Stephen said. I'm forfeiting. He jumped out of the ring, and the threadworms disappeared in a flash of light. The fire struck the empty floor, setting the arena ablaze. Waves of discontentment came from the audience. The spar was almost at its climax, and they were anticipating a thrilling end. The alchemist wasn't pleased either. He had to kill Stephen, seize the 12 beasts, and refine their cores into a cultivation pill. He gave the advisor a meaningful look. The advisor stepped in front of Stephen. Please wait a minute, The spar has only just begun. It's disrespectful to leave so suddenly. Stephen knew they wouldn't let him leave so easily. The mercenaries were determined to kill him, here and now. How so? I tried my best, but I knew I couldn't win. I decided to forfeit because I understand my own limitations. We all saw your fusion beast at the training ground. Is sending out some worms your definition of trying your best? The martial artists watching from the lounge were under the king's command. Watching your spar is valuable learning experience for them. With a few words, the advisor had turned the situation in the mercenaries' favor. No wonder he was so well respected in the Thousand Hands Guild. Cadis's martial artists began to jeer, demanding for Stephen to return to the arena. At that moment, a streak of light burst through the window and stopped in the middle of the ring, dispersing the flames. It was Fiona. All eyes shifted from Stephen to her. The advisor remembered her face. She was the reason for his humiliating defeat during their spar. Miss Fiona, are you here to support your fellow faction member? I've heard a lot about your company. I'm curious about how strong the mercenaries are. Can I take Stephen's place and spar in his stead? Please give me a moment to discuss this with my colleague. The advisor went up to the alchemist. Stephen's not alone. She's a member of the Sullivan family. There's a big difference between their cultivations. Things will get messy if she joins the conflict. Why don't we stop the spar? There's nothing in it for us if we continue. There are so many eyes on us. Our company's reputation will take a hit if we let them go. Young people lack combat experience. I have medicinal pills to recover the energy I spent. All right, keep your guard up. The advisor left the arena, and the alchemist made the first move. He reached inside the furnace and condensed the flames into a blade before lunging for Fiona. She unsheathed her sword with no intention to be outdone. Flashes of light sparked around the ring. They were so fast that the audience couldn't track them with their eyes. Only the sound of metal clashing against metal could be heard. Stephen found an empty spot on the sidelines and sat down to watch the spar. He'd never seen the Sullivan family's sword techniques in person before. When Fiona sparred with the advisor, she'd used her whip. When the alchemist's flaming blade clashed with Fiona's sword, a high-frequency vibration swept the air and extinguished the flames. He jumped back and opened the lid of the furnace. A sea of fire covered the arena, forcing Fiona to leap into the air. There was no place to land. Hovering in the air wasn't a long-term solution. It was harder to maneuver during flight than running on the ground. If she wasn't careful, she would accidentally fly past the ring. She'd chosen to stand up for Stephen, so she couldn't lose the spar by making a technical mistake. Fiona condensed the aura in her sword into a rainbow-colored spear and threw it at the alchemist. Ripples spanned the air from the moment as an explosion rocked the arena. The alchemist didn't move an inch. He tore the lid from the furnace to block the spear. The aura lost its shape, but it didn't disappear completely. It reformed into a new spear and targeted him again. It wouldn't stop until its power was spent. Fiona watched the alchemist deflect the spear with the lid. She transmitted her voice to Stephen on the sidelines. Why is that lid so sturdy? Was it made from a shield? The entire furnace is like a weapon, Stephen explained. It can withstand high temperatures. He probably used high-quality resources to refine cultivation pills, and some of the properties of the final product seeped into the furnace's exterior. Makes sense, but I've never heard of anything that can't be destroyed. My family has a vault of priceless treasures. I doubt his pill can match up to them. Fiona took out an ancient golden bell from her pocket. She tossed it into the air, and it expanded into the size of a water tank. She slammed her palm against the bell, and a sound wave rippled across the arena. As the sound waves crashed into the walls of the building, they split into smaller waves that bounced back towards the ring. Cracks spread across the floor, and the arena began to collapse. The windows and doors shook as the outer walls started to fall apart. Military buildings were designed to resist firearms, but a single bell was destroying it from the inside out. Cadis's martial artist started yelling. Is that woman crazy? Is she trying to destroy the entire building? We'll be in trouble if we don't leave now. The lid of the furnace could only block an attack from one direction at a time. The alchemist's blood boiled and his surroundings blurred. He immediately consumed a medicinal pill to suppress the resonance. The sound waves forced his body to resonate at the same frequency. Dislocated joints, broken bones, displacement of organs. These were minor injuries that would recover with time, but if the flow of inner energy in his meridians deviated, he would have nothing to protect himself. A ball of flame shot out of the furnace and burst in midair. Streaks of fire rained down on Fiona. The shadow of a helicopter passed over the room, and the sound of a loudspeaker echoed from the rooftop of an adjacent building. "Please, stop what you're doing! Our base is about to be destroyed. A spar isn't a life-or-death battle." A military commander was yelling into the loudspeaker on the verge of tears. The king was definitely going to hold him responsible for the destruction. As the sound waves spread, gusts of wind blew the rain of fire away. Fiona was satisfied with how things had turned out. There was no need to go any further. She slowly landed on the ground. "Thank you for the spar. The strength of the mercenary guilds is worthy of its reputation. If there's a chance, I hope we can work together in the future." "The new generation always surpasses the old," the alchemist said through clenched teeth. "With your cultivation and talent, it won't be long before you become one of the strongest cultivators in the Elysian realm," the advisor added. "Let's take care of each other." The alchemist and the advisor spoke flowery words to keep up appearances. Even if they wanted to kill Stephen, they couldn't stop him from leaving with Fiona. Stephen summoned the ice dragon outside the building, and he and Fiona leaped onto its back. The ice dragon spread its wings and disappeared into the horizon, leaving the chaotic mess behind. The advisor was outraged, but at least the alchemist wasn't injured. "Why did they come to Cadus?" the alchemist asked, frustrated. "They weren't here for a fight." "I think they were here for the royal family," the advisor said. "If the US and Cadus formed an alliance, it'll make things more complicated for us. Cadus's king is a good-for-nothing. If he crosses us, we'll annihilate his palace." In Annapolis, Stephen pretended to be surprised when Fiona showed him the glass container. "Did you find that in the hotel's kitchen?" She nodded. "I'm going to give this to the elders at the faction. I don't know how they'll react." "I'll come with you. I want to explain the situation myself." The Mystic Covenant had recruited a new batch of members, but as they took their time to increase their numbers, the ancient cultivators were growing stronger. No one knew how long the faction leader wanted to wait before taking action. Before leaving for the Elysian realm, Stephen asked Jace to oversee their operation in Cadus. "The prisoners have made their move, and the Nine States Financial Group is supporting them. This is a critical time. Don't let the mercenaries ruin our plans." "The Leviathan unit is no match for the mercenaries," Jace said. "If they take action, they'll be killed or even exposed." "Our target isn't the mercenaries. Monitor the Imperial Palace. When the mercenaries leave, threaten Javon and his ministers and make them understand the position they're in." Stephen's plan was reliable, and Jace left to prepare. Stephen, Vivian, and Fiona went back to the Elysian realm. The atmosphere was as peaceful as always. The bustling crowd in the Haven domain was still there, even though the elders had finished recruiting new students. There were over 100 new members, and they were all skilled and talented. As for those who weren't selected, the Mercenary Guilds Alliance welcomed them with open arms. They offered high prices for regular cultivators to join the guilds and proposed business deals for cultivators with deep family backgrounds. Stephen, Vivian, and Fiona were surprised by the pressuring aura as they passed by the Mercenary Guilds Alliance's headquarters. They felt like they were standing at the edge of a collapsing space, and the violent turbulence threatened to sweep them into the endless darkness. "If they've hired this many new members, they must have a lot of money to waste," Vivian said. "Their guilds were established for the purpose of amassing wealth," Fiona explained. "They're not like the Mystic Covenant, who only knows how to fight and kill." "Where do they store their wealth?" Stephen asked. "Did they build a secret treasury somewhere or hide their money in another realm?" Wealth correlated with the cultivator's strength and progress. Herbs, cultivation pills, ores, and crystals were priceless commodities. To maintain a steady progress in cultivation, these resources had to be consistently consumed. Not everyone could afford them. Fiona looked at him suspiciously. "Why do you want to know?" "No reason, I was just asking," Stephen said, surprised by his own curiosity. The airy Tristan's thieving ways must have rubbed off on him. a group of people exited the building. One of the middle-aged men in the crowd looked familiar. Stephen thought about it and recognized him as the CEO of Amethyst Auction House in Minori City. "Thank you for lending us a hand," the CEO said gratefully. "I'd like to express my gratitude on behalf of the City Lord of Minori City." The mercenary shook his hand. "Not at all. This is a transactional exchange. Your money for our services. We're a professional organization." To ensure the safety of Minori City, the city lord, Dante, had spent a large amount of money to hire the mercenaries. He'd sent the staff from Amethyst Auction House to relay his request. Stephen wasn't the only one listening to their conversation. Fiona heard it all, and she wasn't happy about it. "Are you worried about the city?" Stephen asked. "No, with this many people, the ancient plants will be taken care of sooner or later. But the ranking of each city depends on the number of cultivators living there. Even if the ancient plants are removed, this incident might scare the residents away. They'll start thinking or moving, and my family's authority will weaken." Each domain in the Elysian realm had their fair share of cities. The city lords typically inherited their positions from their family. But every 5 years, the strength of each city lord was reevaluated. The 10 cities ranked at the bottom would have the right to challenge another city to move up the ranking. Anyone could request a challenge. As long as they defeated the city lord, the city would be theirs. Judging from the most recent incident with the ancient plants, Minori City would be a popular target. They might even rank at the bottom. When they arrived at the Mystic Covenant's headquarters, the 3 emissaries hurried past them out the door with the team. They didn't have a chance to ask them what was going on. Ren and the other elders walked out of the conference room with tired expressions. "You're finally back, Fiona. Did you find anything during your investigation?" "I found a sample of an ancient plant. It's evidence that the mercenaries are conspiring with the ancient cultivators." The elders exchanged disbelieving glances. "Is that true?" Fiona answered their questions in detail, while Stephen filled in the gaps. The gravity of the situation was glaring, but the decision to send the faction's combat forces to eliminate the ancient cultivators was still up in the air. The higher-ups of the Mystic Covenant had conflicting opinions. One side insisted on taking action, while the other believed in a more conservative approach. They each had their own reasoning, but the final decision remained in the faction leaders' hands. Ren was part of the crowd who believed in taking action sooner rather than later. He had the same mindset as Stephen. "Is the faction still not going to do anything?" Stephen asked, watching the other elders return to their respective offices. "When we acted last time, most of our new recruits were killed," Ren said. "The faction leader doesn't want to repeat. He says we have to make sufficient preparations to minimize the casualties. If we keep sending our members to the front lines without proper training, no one will join us in the future." "How long do you think we'll have to wait?" "At least until the 3 emissaries finish dealing with the ancient plants outside Minori City. They need to evaluate the danger before suppressing them." Ren took Stephen, Vivian, and Fiona to his courtyard in the bamboo forest and gave them a rundown of the emissaries' assignment. The faction was famous for the mystic fire array. After casting, the array would absorb power from the sun, moon, and stars, turning it into flames. It would be more than enough to burn the ancient plants to ashes. As Fiona's teacher, Ren would have helped her family resolve their crisis. But without the faction leader's instructions, he couldn't act on his own. In a worst-case scenario, even if Dante couldn't fend off the challengers, he would be able to escort his family out of the city safely. "The mercenaries are getting stronger," Vivian said. "What are we going to do about them?" "To be honest, we only have a 50% chance of suppressing them, and what they've done isn't enough to prompt the faction to make a move against them." "Doesn't that just prove how flawed the Mystic Covenant is?" Stephen asked. "The entry requirements are strict, and the new recruits aren't even given that many resources before they're sent out on missions. But the mercenaries are giving their new members money and resources in exchange for joining them." The Mystic Covenant liked to brag that they were a righteous martial arts faction, but the truth was, they were far inferior to mercenaries in terms of sufficient funds. "This is how the Mystic Covenant has always been," Ren said. "One elder can't change how the faction is run. The team we sent to the Asura realm returned recently. The Celestial Beast has agreed to lend us his support. A group of beasts will be coming to the Elysian realm in a week or so." That was the first good news Stephen had heard in weeks. Given the faction's track record of sending their new members on missions before they were ready, he could already guess that they would do the same to the beasts from the Asura realm. He had to look out for them when they arrived. There were no missions for the time being. Stephen and Fiona decided to head to the outskirts of Minori City to watch the emissaries work. It hadn't been that long since the Manaroth flower took root in the soil near the stream, but the vitality of the forest had been sucked dry. Thousands of vines covered the ground. The emissaries sighed as they observed the destruction. It was hard to imagine that plants were capable of this much damage. When they tossed a ball of energy to test the plants, the flowers growing on the vines extended into the air. When they came into contact with the ball of energy, an explosion erupted. As the dust settled, the emissaries and their team saw that the flowers hadn't been harmed. They simply returned to where they were attached to the vines. The city lord, Dante, heard the disturbance and hurried over. "We've tried all kinds of techniques, but we couldn't destroy the plants. They've absorbed too much spiritual energy from the forest." The emissaries glanced at him and then at the group of people behind him. "Are you here to tell us about your failures? What else have you done to protect the city?" Dante hesitated, feeling slightly embarrassed. "I've hired mercenaries from the Haven domain to help deal with the plants. The ordinary residents of the city have packed their things. They're ready to leave the city in case we fail." As the city lord, whether it was him, his family, or the civilians, any form of escape would leave a stain on his reputation. But their lives were more important than his dignity. The mercenaries he'd hired were beside him. They'd agreed to help because they wanted to exert pressure on the Mystic Covenant. If they resolved the crisis, it meant that the faction had failed to respond to a request to help from a city lord in a timely manner. The captain of the mercenaries stepped forward. "The city lord has already paid us. We can't take his money for nothing. Let us try to resolve the problem. If we fail, it won't be too late for the faction to step in." The emissaries didn't care one way or another. They moved to the side with their teams and let the mercenaries take the stage. The captain and the mercenaries leaped into the air with a black rod in their hands. They chanted a spell, and the rods extended into the size of a lamppost. They threw them into the ground, surrounding the ancient plants in a circle. Black clouds condensed in the sky, accompanied by a faint rumble of thunder. They were setting up an array that attracted lightning from the heavens. The ancient plants sensed the danger and instinctively wrapped their vines around the rods, trying to break them, but to no avail. The rods were long and surprisingly heavy. There was a strong magnetic attraction between them. A clap of thunder echoed over the outskirts, and lightning crashed into the circle of rods. The magnetic field amplified its energy by hundreds of times. Each rod burned bright red as the lightning seeped into the ground. The earth rolled like waves, and a cloud of smoke gushed through the cracks. Targeting the roots was the key to eradicating ancient plants. They absorbed spiritual energy from their surroundings through their roots. The vines and flowers wouldn't be able to regrow if the source of their energy was cut off. Dante was impressed by the array's effects. He could feel the ancient plant's aura begin to weaken. The Mercenary Guild's alliance is worthy of their reputation. Their array is seamlessly annihilating the ancient plants from the roots. "We happen to have suitable weapons in our storage to suppress the plants," the captain of the mercenaries said modestly. "The city guards you train are skilled cultivators. We're no match for them." The three emissaries and their team listened to Dante and the mercenaries flatter each other with impassive expressions. The Mystic Covenant didn't care about fame or wealth. If the mercenaries could handle this without their help, it would save them the trouble of doing it themselves. Stephen and Fiona were watching from a cliff in the distance. "Should we remind the city lord not to get too close to the Mercenary Guild's alliance?" "My dad knows. He only hired them because the ancient plants were growing out of control, and the Mystic Covenant was slow to reply. I'll remind him when this is over." The shaking underground intensified as the aura of the ancient plants diminished. It seemed like the vines were struggling harder to resist the lightning, but Stephen didn't think they'd be destroyed that easily. "Ancient plants multiply quickly. If they're faced with a losing battle, they'll spread their seeds and survive elsewhere. I can feel a strange aura coming to life." Stephen probed the changes underground with the threadworm's spiritual energy. The lightning was destructive, but it didn't last for long. It had struck the roots, but the seed was at the core of the Manoroth flower above the ground. The seed was the size of a fist, and it moved between the vines, dodging the residual electricity and taking advantage of the smoke and making its way beneath the soil. Once the fire died down and the smoke dispersed, it would take root and germinate again. As the lightning from the heavens dimmed, the mercenaries retracted their remaining energy from the rods, and the clouds disappeared. The magnetic field disappeared, but the area remained scorching hot. To the mercenaries' surprise, a seed shot out of the smoke. The captain reacted quickly. He condensed a screen of light in front of his team. The seed grinded against the barrier, and his hands shook from the effort it took to maintain it. He instructed his team to land on the ground. They'd be easy targets if they stayed in the sky. As the mercenaries retreated, the smoke dissipated. Vines were scattered over the scorched soil, but a cluster of new vines and flowers had taken their place. The mercenaries had spent a great deal of energy to activate the array. There was nothing more they could do. "The real show is about to begin," Stephen said. "I'm looking forward to the Mystic Covenant's famous array." "Aren't you worried it'll get out of hand?" Fiona asked. "Everything'll work out. You'll see." The Mystic Fire Array wasn't Stephen's last resort to eradicating the Manoroth flower. It was the cane Luciano had given him. It had power to restrain every plant in the world. If the emissaries failed, he would come forward with the cane. The three emissaries finally made their move. They pointed their swords at the sky and shrouded the outskirts in a fiery red glow. A painting of mountains and rivers appeared overhead, like a projection from another world. Their team wasn't there for decoration. They condensed a storm of aura around the vines to keep them in one place. A flaming diagram descended from the sky and covered the ancient plants. It was burning, but Stephen couldn't feel an ounce of heat radiating from it. He looked up at the painting. As the diagram absorbed more of the ancient plant's spiritual energy, the mountains and rivers became more vivid and real. "How are they doing that? It's like sealing something into a scroll." "You should ask Ren," Fiona replied. "The Mystic Covenant is full of secret techniques. The Mystic Fire Array is more profound than the one the mercenaries used." Dante had been concerned when the mercenaries failed, but the situation had reversed once more when the emissaries and their team stepped in. It seemed that the capabilities of a cultivator couldn't be measured with money. When the ancient plants completely withered and turned to dust, their life force vanished, and they were recorded next to the rivers. The red glow of the painting waned, and it shattered into particles of light, disappearing without a trace. Dante went up to the emissaries and expressed his heartfelt gratitude. "Thank you for ensuring Minori City's safety. I've hired mercenaries as backup. Please don't misunderstand. I wasn't questioning the Mystic Covenant's skills." The emissaries smiled and nodded in understanding. "It's not a big deal. You were only trying to protect the city. Is there anything else we can help with?" "That was all. You stopped the ancient plants just in time. No harm was done. Would you like to visit our city for a celebration?" Dante's invitation was sincere, but the emissaries politely turned him down. They had more important things to do. Getting rid of the ancient plants on the outskirts of Minori City was a small part of their assigned tasks. Their real target was in the human realm. That was where the ancient cultivators were growing ancient plants. "Thank you for the invitation, but we still have work to do. We can't stay for long." The emissaries and their team left, followed by the humiliated mercenaries. They'd failed their mission and had no choice but to return to the Haven domain in shame. After everyone left, Fiona took Stephen to the city gate, where Dante was waiting. "I sensed your aura, Fiona. I told you the ancient plants were dangerous," Dante chided. "I made sure to maintain my distance," she protested. "Besides, you know I can't miss out on a good show. I'm a member of the Mystic Covenant now. You can't keep treating me like a kid." "I'll stop worrying when you learn every single one of our family's techniques." Their banter continued until Dante remembered Stephen was next to them. Even without the emissaries, he was an important guest of the Sullivan family. Stephen and Fiona were Ren's fellow students. To Dante, it was like having another son. The three of them made their way to the Sullivan family's mansion for a celebrity feast. The wine was brewed from wild fruits that contained a dense amount of spiritual energy. Even a powerful cultivator would find it hard to resist its intoxicating effects. "This is good wine," Stephen praised, feeling a little tipsy. He hadn't felt this way since he started his career as a martial artist. "If you like it, I can arrange for more bottles to be delivered to your home in the human realm," Dante offered. "Thank you, but that's not necessary. It'll be too much of a hassle to deliver between realms." Before Stephen ascended, he'd secretly entered the Elysian realm using the Bone Blade. Minori City was the first city he'd visited. It held a special place in his heart, but there was a lot he didn't know. The crisis with the ancient plants had been resolved, and he was expecting to see familiar faces out and about on the streets. But instead, everyone he passed by on the streets was a stranger, and they didn't look like they were from the city. There were cultivators who lived in the wilderness, but most of them stayed in the cities. They took on all kinds of jobs to earn money and purchase cultivation resources through trade or with the Elysian realm's multiple forms of currency. It was rare to see cultivators wandering aimlessly outside their cities. "You're not an outsider, so I'll tell you the truth," Dante said. "There were hundreds of residents who chose to move to another city because of the ancient plants. We've fallen in the rankings, and the visitors you saw in the streets are challengers. They're aiming to take over my position as city lord." Possessing the authority of a city was equivalent to obtaining endless wealth. The new faces in the city were experienced cultivators. Once the Mystic Covenant released an official ranking of the cities across the 5 domains, they would officially challenge the Sullivan family. Stephen felt a twinge of guilt for what happened to Minori City. He hadn't realized planting the Manaroth flower on the outskirts would cause such a predicament. "How are you preparing for it?" "There's nothing to prepare. We'll have to face the challenges with all of our strength and try to protect our position." "How much time do you have left?" "About 3 months. That's when the Mystic Covenant will release the rankings. Before then, the rules will be maintained. No one is allowed to fight or kill within the city." Fiona stayed quiet as they discussed. She glanced out the window at the bustling crowd, trying to keep her anger in check. She knew how strong the potential challengers would be, but she wouldn't be going down without a fight. "How confident are you in defeating the challengers?" Stephen asked. "We're not optimistic about the outcome," Dante said. "In the past 300 years, every city that was challenged changed leadership. The families in charge weren't weak, but the enticing benefits of becoming a city lord attracts all kinds of cultivators. People die for wealth and power. That's how it's always been. But that's not the only reason they're in the city. After being a city lord for so long, it's natural to have made new enemies. Some of the challengers are using this opportunity to kill me. Moving my family out of the city is the safest option." Fiona was infuriated by Dante's words. She turned away from the window. "I'm not leaving. I'm going to face every challenger head on." As Stephen listened to Dante and Fiona's bickering, he had a better grasp of the situation. It was a given that there was someone among the challengers stronger than Dante. He wondered if there was a more peaceful method to resolve their predicament before the 3-month deadline, like increasing Minori's city ranking. The number of cultivators determines a city's ranking. Is it possible to convince the residents who left to come back? "No, they won't be returning," Dante replied. "They've taken up residence in other cities, and those city lords will be doing everything in their power to keep them there. For example, they'll give out herbs, ores, and crystals, reduce taxes, and recruit them as guards. The new residents will also be given a chance to negotiate with the city lord in private." It seemed there was no way around it. The Sullivan family would have to face the challengers once the rankings were released. As night fell, a group of people lingered by the street leading to the Sullivan family's mansion. They were gathering intelligence on the city lord in advance to prepare for the challenges. The guards stationed around the mansion weren't allowed to use force. They could only pretend like they weren't there. Another group of well-trained intelligence personnel were hiding among the trees with their eyes on the mansion. They were from the Falcon Guild. The chief intelligence officer had gone missing, and the guild proclaimed him dead. His student, Tobias, had recovered from the injuries he'd sustained during the competition with Stephen and Vivian. He had been assigned the captain of the mission to gather intelligence, and he was thrilled to see Stephen in the mansion. There was no evidence that Stephen had killed the intelligence officer, but Tobias had a feeling that he was the culprit. His original plan was to complete the mission before heading to the human realm to take care of Stephen. This saved him the trouble. I heard Stephen and the Sullivan family became close recently, one of the mercenaries said. He and Fiona are like brother and sister. Tobias scoffed. They're just using each other. We can't kill Stephen now, but if he participates in the City Lord Challenge, we'll kill him openly. The Mercenary Guild Alliance's ambitions had spread to Minori City. If they could take control of the Sullivan family, they'd be able to develop outside the Haven domain, away from the prying eyes of the Mystic Covenant. As the City Lord, Dante rarely left the city. There wouldn't be a chance to kill him before the challenge, but Fiona was different. If they kidnapped or assassinated her, their chances of taking the city would be higher. As the hours passed, Minori City entered a curfew. Only the city guards were allowed on the streets. Everyone lingered around the mansion had disappeared. At the center of the Haven domain, the Mystic Covenant's headquarters was brightly lit. Eradicating the ancient plants near Minori City had boosted the members' confidence in taking down the ancient cultivator. The faction leader was sitting at the head of the table, fiddling with a jade ring on his finger. His hair was white, and his eyes shone like stars. It was impossible to guess his age. The higher-ups stood on both sides of the conference table, waiting for him to speak. What's your opinion on the ancient plants outside Minori City? The array was effective, one of the higher-ups replied. It absorbed the plant's spiritual energy. If the ancient cultivators use these plants against us, the array will be able to counter them. The faction leader understood the danger of the ancient plants more than anyone else in the Mystic Covenant. Secret information like this was passed from generation to generation. Not even the elders nor the sentry guards of the faction were allowed to know. There are many species of ancient plants. When they're grown together, it doesn't take long for them to form an ecosystem. When you reach the human realm, don't rush into battle with the ancient cultivators. Find out what they're planning in detail and investigate the ancient plants first. He ordered Ren and Tirek to form a team of elite members from the expeditionary team and take them to the human realm for the operation. This was an important investigation. If things went well, they would finally be able to confront the traitors face to face. The entire Elysian realm had their eyes on the Mystic Covenant. Their new operation didn't go unnoticed. While they were making preparations, the ancient cultivators lurked in the realm went back to the human realm to report to NATO Run. Warhawk's Island was as peaceful and beautiful as a painting. There was no trace of the past explosion. The ports along the coast were in full swing. NATO Run was on a boat, looking out over the deck at the ocean. Parodi and the other members of his team landed beside him. The Mystic Covenant is sending a team to investigate us. Are they finally making their move? I was wondering how long those old-timers would stall for time. The faction recruited new members recently. We don't have enough people to lure them away. We'll have to sneak in and get the herbs. They were still missing crucial ingredients to brew the strengthening liquid. Parodi and the other ancient cultivators had been observing the area around the Mystic Covenant's warehouse to familiarize themselves with the best route to sneak in. They were still missing crucial ingredients to brew the strengthening liquid. NATO Run instructed Parodi to stay on the island, while the rest followed him to the warehouse to steal the herbs they needed. At the Research Institute, NATO Run opened the safe in the office. There were dozens of test tubes filled with red liquid inside. We haven't tested these samples yet. The liquid in the test tubes was extracted from ancient plants and mixed with a virus. The Mystic Covenant has a large supply of medicinal and cultivation pills, Parodi said. Will this be effective? Our goal isn't to kill them. If we infect the expeditionary team coming to the human realm to investigate us, they'll start using up their stocks of herbs and pills. The faction won't have time to pay attention to us, and security won't be as strict. The fewer eyes on us, the more freedom we'll have. As the captain, NATO Run had a talent for devising schemes. His plan cleared Parodi's doubts. The team opened a spatial rift and returned to the Elysian realm. A tense atmosphere had settled in Minori City. Everyone was aware of the impending crisis the Sullivan family was about to face. Dante urged Fiona and Stephen to go back to the Haven domain after 2 days in the city. As Stephen drove, he noticed Fiona's restlessness in the passenger seat. We have 3 months to prepare. Have some confidence. Did you forget about our discussion 2 days ago? Fiona snapped. In the past 300 years, every city lord who was challenged lost their position to an outsider. Stephen slowed down and stopped the car by the side of the road. There are many people who want to take your dad's position. It's unrealistic for him to fight each challenger one by one. It makes more sense for the strongest of the bunch to face him. To decrease the number of challengers, we'll make them compete with each other first. The rest will be simple if we manage to rig the competition. The final challenger will have the right to fight the city lord, but if they forfeit, your dad will keep his position. Fiona was skeptical. How are we going to manipulate the competition? There's going to be hundreds or even thousands of challengers. We'll have to hire too many people undercover, and who would work for us anyway? Everyone knows the Mystic Covenant works closely with the city lords. The competition will be fierce. There's going to be injuries and deaths. Who would risk their lives for us? A group of beasts are about to join the Mystic Covenant. Maybe I can ask them if they're interested in helping us out. Fiona had forgotten that Stephen was friends with the celestial beast. It wasn't a stretch for the beast to accept his request. Everyone in the Elysian realm had heard about the war between the beasts and the Asuras. Their strength was genuine. The beasts won't do it for free, Stephen continued. Be prepared to accept their conditions. As they sped down the highway, they passed by mountains, lakes, and deserts. If it weren't for the roads connecting the domains, the area between each city would be labeled as a no-man's land. Tobias had taken 2 mercenaries with him and followed their car into the forest. They were dressed in black and wearing masks to hide their identities. He'd left the other mercenaries in the city to keep an eye on Dante. He wasn't expecting Stephen to leave the city with Fiona. They'd been on the road for some time, and it was getting dark. Dealing with Stephen would be easy, but Fiona was more difficult to kill. As a member of the Sullivan family who'd ruled Minori City for so many years, she definitely had a few tricks up her sleeve. I'll find a way to keep Fiona occupied, Tobias said. Kill Stephen while she's distracted. If you can't, then just sever his limbs. If he's seriously injured, we can deal with him at any time. That was what the Mercenary Guild excelled at, assassinating their targets in secret. The 3 of them increased their speed to run ahead of the car. Stephen was focused on the road when suddenly the windows shattered. He and Fiona had fast reaction speeds. They condensed a barrier of energy, broke through the roof, and leaped out of the car. Stephen and Fiona had their backs to each other as they scanned their surroundings, searching for the assailant. There was no sign of them, but a net came crashing from the sky. It was made from silk thinner than a strand of hair. If they weren't looking carefully, they would have missed it. They've been preparing to ambush us, Fiona observed. Don't touch the net. It's not a simple weapon. They dashed in opposite directions to escape the net. The thinner the thread, the sharper it was. Fiona's intuition was correct. The mercenaries had soaked the entire net in poison. If a single thread had grazed Stephen and Fiona, they would have been paralyzed. The 2 mercenaries followed Stephen, while Tobias blocked Fiona's path. Fiona looked at his attire in disdain. Too scared to reveal your identity? You didn't have to put in so much effort to cover up. Once you're dead, your identity won't be a secret anymore. Tobias laughed. Are you going to be this arrogant when the Sullivan family's chased out of the city? That was Fiona's sore spot, and she was less than pleased to be criticized by some random assassin. Without another word, she drew her sword and lunged for him. As for Stephen, he was at a disadvantage from the beginning. His cultivation was only at the silver rank, much lower than most cultivators in the Elysian realm. He opted to land on the ground to utilize the terrain. He summoned the threadworms, and they condensed a layer of iron sand. When the mercenaries swept it to the side with a swing of their swords, it came together to form warriors made of sand. The mercenaries slammed their fists into the sand creations and destroyed their bodies. The metallic fragments raining over the ground condensed into swords and blades. They weren't enough to harm the mercenaries, but their sheer numbers were a nuisance. The mercenaries wanted to wrap up the battle as soon as possible. They bypassed the weapons and the sand creations and rushed towards Stephen. The threadworms had covered the ground with a layer of iron sand. When they came into contact with it, the sand crept up their legs and wrapped around their torso. The metallic fragments were heavy, and they felt like sandbags were weighing them down. While they were rooted in place, Stephen infused his sword with a killin's aura. Blades of fire struck the mercenaries, but they weren't shaken. They calmly dusted the sand off their skin and clothes. The threadworms swung their tails toward the mercenaries while they were distracted. Their scales were sturdy, and they'd also coated them with a layer of iron sand to enhance their defensive properties. The mercenaries were getting annoyed. Their target was Stephen, not these worms. One of them threw a punch at each of the threadworms' tails in quick succession, shattering the iron sand and cracking their scales. Blood seeped from their wounds. The threadworms had consumed a large amount of ores and crystals, making them one of the most impenetrable beasts around. But the mercenary had cracked their scales with one fist. Stephen's spiritual energy was connected to the threadworms, and he could sense their pain. He looked up at the sky. Fiona was locked in battle with the third assailant. As expected of a member of the Sullivan family, she was on par with her opponent. The mercenaries followed his line of sight. "Don't wait for her. She won't be coming to your rescue. After we kill you, she'll be next." "It won't be that easy to get rid of me," Stephen shot back. He condensed a storm of iron sand to obstruct their view. The threadworms reduced their size, and he gathered them onto his palm before running into the forest for cover. The wilderness couldn't be considered an obstacle for cultivators of higher planes. They could flatten an entire forest with a wave of their hand or a swing of their sword. Stephen darted behind a tree out of sight. He opened his hand and inspected the threadworm's injuries. They laid motionless on his palm as their blood stained his skin. He carefully ran his fingers over their tails to stop the bleeding and speed up their recovery with his inner energy. Stephen placed the threadworms into his pocket, sheathed his sword, and took out the wooden cane from Luciano. It wasn't embedded with crystals or imbued with arrays, but there was a string of red symbols painted with a brush. He didn't know what they were for, but there was no time to think about it. He infused his inner energy into the cane and pointed it at the trees and flowers nearby. The vegetation began to absorb the spiritual energy in the air. The threadworms poked their heads out of his pocket. "What are you going to do with those plants?" "They're weaker than our sand. They won't be able to block swords or energy." "I'm going to use them to scare off our enemy," Stephen said. "They'll think they stepped into a forest of ancient plants." He and the threadworms concealed their auras and hid behind the dense vegetation just as the two mercenaries came running. Leaves and flower petals shot towards them, aiming for their vitals. They weren't as strong as ancient plants, but they were able to lock on to the mercenaries' eyes, carotid arteries, and joints. It took one small wound for the plants to invade their bodies. The mercenaries were horrified by the scene before them. They'd heard about the dangers of ancient plants from their colleagues. They condensed a barrier of energy and retreated to the edge of the forest. "What the hell is going on? Why are there so many ancient plants? We should regroup and come up with a new plan." "But Stephen's up ahead. We can bypass the forest and chase after him." The two mercenaries had conflicting opinions, but one thing was for sure. Ancient plants were not to be trifled with. The team Dante had hired to handle the ancient plants near Minori City was almost wiped out. They would have been killed if the Mystic Covenant wasn't there. The two of them were only intelligence agents. They weren't as strong as the other combat-oriented mercenaries. One of them hesitated for a moment before deciding to give up. If they lost their lives here, their identities would be exposed, and that would complicate things for the Mercenary Guild's alliance. "Let's get out of here. We saw Stephen run into the forest. With his cultivation, he'll end up dead before reaching the other side." The other mercenary agreed, and they flew into the sky to help Tobias. Stephen transmitted his voice to Fiona. "I scared off my opponents. They're coming for you. Retreat into the forest and wait till there's an opportunity." "Are you telling me to run? I can handle them just fine on my own." Fiona was blinded by anger. Stephen could only try and talk some sense into her. "Don't waste your energy. We're not at the Haven domain yet. There could be more enemies up ahead. If anything happens to you, your dad won't be able to focus on the upcoming challenges." The reality of the crisis sunk in and cleared Fiona's mind. "Fine. I'll meet you on the road on the other side of the forest." The aura in her sword condensed into a phantom of a rainbow phoenix. It flapped its wings, and a blinding light covered the sky. The three mercenaries were forced to look away and hide behind a boulder on the ground. The phoenix circled the sky for 5 minutes before disappearing. Fiona had already reached the other side of the forest. Tobias assumed his teammates had killed Stephen before coming to help. "Where's Stephen's body? Is he dead?" "He ran into the forest. It's full of ancient plants. We couldn't go further. Tobias was the only one who held a grudge against Stephen. He couldn't risk his team's life to take revenge for his teacher. Fiona was nowhere in sight, which meant that the side mission was an utter failure. Tobias should have expected it wouldn't be easy to kill Stephen. Otherwise, he wouldn't have survived until now with his low cultivation. The three mercenaries went back to Minori City to continue their real mission and help their team gather intelligence about the Sullivan family. The rest of Stephen and Fiona's journey to the Haven Domain was smooth. They mounted the ice dragon and arrived on the outskirts of the main city in less than 2 hours. They were here to find a plot of land to construct a new mansion for the Sullivan family and their friends, in case the challenges didn't go as planned. It didn't take long for Fiona to find a suitable location. She chose a place close to Wren's courtyard. If anything unexpected happened, he was only one forest away. While the construction was in progress, she stayed in the courtyard to cultivate day and night to prepare for the upcoming challengers at Minori City. While Fiona was busy with the new mansion, Stephen went to visit Kim at Wren's courtyard to ask about recent events in the human realm. One of her clones was living at the villa in Annapolis, and she was up to date with military affairs. I didn't see that many members of the expeditionary team, Kim said. They stopped by the military administration building to ask for some information on ancient cultivators. Then they left, and we haven't seen them since. The military has been monitoring the island through satellites, but there's no sign of the ancient cultivators. Having the target in plain sight felt less like a threat than when they were in hiding. The ancient cultivators had gone missing, and Stephen didn't know what to make of it. Kim noticed his concern and tried to reassure him. The Mystic Covenant has finally sent another team to the human realm. When the ancient cultivators come back, they won't be able to do whatever they want. Let the faction deal with their mess. There was nothing more to be done for the time being. Stephen, Kim, and Fiona diligently cultivated in Wren's courtyard, hoping to make a breakthrough in their cultivation before the war began. Nothing much was going on in the human realm. Wren and Tirek had sent their team ahead of them to investigate the ancient cultivators. They made sure to warn them to take precautions and avoid drawing attention to themselves. A week later, 100 powerful beasts from the Asura realm arrived in the Haven Domain. They were a much-needed combat force to make up for the faction's diminishing numbers. The beasts took on human forms and wandered around the Mystic Covenant's headquarters to explore. They were accompanied by members of the faction at all times. It was widely known that Stephen had connections with the celestial beast. The faction's higher-ups put him in charge of the reception. He was responsible for arranging accommodations for the beasts. When Stephen arrived at the office building to welcome them, a young man with dark hair and alluring gray eyes broke away from the crowd and went up to him. Stephen didn't recognize him, but the man seemed to know who he was. The young man introduced himself as Killian's mount, the Sky Lion. Stephen remembered the massive shark-like beast who'd descended from the clouds when Killian first awakened. At that time, he hadn't given it much thought, but the Sky Lion must have waited tens of thousands of years for his master to reincarnate and summon him again. Stephen had never seen the Sky Lion in human form, but his strength was undeniable. The Sky Lion greeted him with a smile. "It's been a while, Stephen. Your cultivation has improved since the last time we met. You have a lot of potential for a human." "Thanks. It's nice to see you again. Are you here because Killian sent you?" Stephen asked. He doubted Killian's impression of the Mystic Covenant had improved since their last meeting. The faction had essentially forced him to accept the beast's mortal enemies who had terrorized them for the past thousands of years back into the realm. He would never agree to help the faction unless there was something in it for him. "Yeah, he asked me to bring the beast to the Haven Domain. The faction opened a spatial rift for us," the Sky Lion replied, motioning for Stephen to follow him to a remote corridor to avoid people eavesdropping on their conversation. The Asura realm was a barren wasteland. The environment was harsh, and it had been ravaged by thousands of years of war. Cultivation resources were either scarce or buried too deep in the ground to be excavated. To improve the strength of the beasts, Killian wanted to establish a trade network between the Asura and Elysian realms. "So you're here for cultivation resources?" Stephen asked. "That doesn't sound too difficult. The faction provides its members with the resources." The faction leader has agreed to give us herbs and pills, but it's far from enough to strengthen our large population in the Asura realm. The amount he provided us is like splashing a cup of water over a wildfire. I don't know how much capital you have available, but you'll need a large amount to do business. It's hard to convert currency between realms. You'll probably have to barter. For example, exchange the ores and crystals from the Asura realm for herbs and pills from the Elysian realm. The Sky Lion tilted his head, blinking at him in confusion. From the innocence in his eyes, it was obvious he hadn't been expecting the corruption of capitalism a day in his life. Killian didn't teach us anything. He said all we have to do was follow your instructions and we'll earn a lot of money. Stephen didn't know whether to be flattered by Killian's trust in him or indignant that he was being used for free labor. The beasts were skilled at fighting and killing, but they'd be swindled as soon as they tried to compete with shrewd and scheming merchants. There were only two ways to earn a hefty sum in a short amount of time. The first was to help the Sullivan family preserve their authority in Minori City and collaborate with their businesses. The second was to steal from the Mercenary Guild's Alliance's secret treasury. The Sky Lion's eyes gleamed in anticipation as Stephen finished explaining their two options. Adrenaline coursed through his veins. There was nothing more thrilling to a beast than the joy of war and battle. When should we go? How about now? Be patient, Stephen said. The cities in the Elysian realm have strict regulations, and the guards who maintain order are stronger than you think. We need to wait for the right time. It would be better for these simple-minded beasts to stay at the Mystic Covenant's training ground next to the headquarters and concentrate on cultivating while learning the rules and cultures of these realms. Changing their appearances was far from enough. To fully integrate themselves into the Mystic Covenant and make missions easier instead of more complicated, they would need to understand the faction's position among the 6 realms. Unbeknownst to the public, the magnificent office building was an external establishment of the Mystic Covenant. Their core building was located in a mountain range in the suburbs of the Haven Domain. The faction leader and some of the elders cultivated here. Regular members like Stephen didn't have a chance to enter. However, as the captain of a disbanded squad of the Mystic Covenant, Nadorun knew every inch of the mountain like the back of his hand. He was at the foot of the mountain with his team, and a nostalgic feeling washed over him as he looked up at the familiar scenery. This brings me back to the old days. I wonder how many elders are still alive after so long. A few of them were killed on the battlefield, Parodi said. What a pity. If they were still alive, I would have killed them with my own hands. Nadorun reached out with his aura and discovered a cluster of defensive arrays buried deep underground. They thrummed with energy. Aside from his team, there were no other cultivators at the foot of the mountain. When the last ray of sunset faded into the horizon, they began their trek up the path. The dangers the mountain was known for were hardly a challenge for them. Every martial arts faction had a treasure vault, and the Mystic Covenant was no exception. Nadorun's team was missing 3 herbs. They weren't that valuable, and they were usually stored in ordinary warehouses along with other alchemy materials. The faction's security was divided into levels. Areas with the highest level of security, like vaults containing secret martial arts and cultivation manuals, were only accessible by the faction leader. These vaults were passed down from one faction leader to the next. Areas with intermediate levels of security were open to elders and sentry guards. The items stored in these vaults were essential to battle. They included weapons, forging resources, and blueprints. The normal warehouses had the lowest level of security. They were used to store miscellaneous items, including frequently used herbs. They would go bad if stored for too long, so they were stored in warehouses with easy access. As Nadorun's team went further up the mountain, they sensed a team on patrol. There's not that many of them. Is that the most the faction could spare? It's because they're not expecting anyone to rob their normal warehouses. The elders cultivating on the mountain are the real guards. End it quickly. Don't give them a chance to attack, Nadorun instructed. Yes, sir. The night was dark. Clouds covered the moon, and there was a chilly breeze drifting across the mountain. 2 members of the Mystic Covenant were standing at the entrance to a cave, bored to death. This was their job day after day, year after year. They were tired of this monotonous life. They say the faction recruited new members into the expeditionary team recently. When's it going to be our turn? If we stay on this mountain for the rest of our lives, we'll never have a chance to make a name for ourselves. Our faction's enemies are more than we can handle. Where are you getting your confidence from? You need practical combat experience. It's a crucial factor in staying alive during missions. Your cultivation won't be enough." The other guards listened to their conversation with a sigh as they looked up at the bleak night sky. Before joining the Mystic Covenant, they'd fantasized about an action-packed life, but the reality was harsh and nothing like their dreams and ambitions. Guarding the warehouses and patrolling the mountain didn't give them any sense of accomplishment. An older guard spoke up. "We've been guarding the forbidden area for years. We know too much. They wouldn't send us back to the faction and make us carry out random missions. If our enemy gets their hands on us, it'll put the faction at risk. We're going to have to live the rest of our lives here like criminals." NATO Run was hiding in the dense forest with his team, and they heard the entire conversation. "They'll be freed from their responsibilities once they're dead. Pay attention to their auras. When they're killed, imitate them immediately." His team nodded in disinterest. A battle with such a wide gap between their strength wasn't worth watching. NATO Run's figure blurred and disappeared into the darkness. He swept past the 10 guards like a ghost. There were no wounds on their bodies or the dull sound of a fatal blow. It was as simple and quiet as turning off a light switch in a room. In an instant, the life force of the guards came to an abrupt end. At the same time, NATO Run's team imitated their auras. That way, the elders on the mountain wouldn't notice anything unusual. NATO Run searched the bodies and found the key. That was too easy. Letting them guard the warehouse is a waste of space. The warehouse wasn't an ordinary building. The faction had stored their items inside a cave to make it harder for the outsiders to find it. At the end of the cave was a heavy stone gate. NATO Run inserted the key, and the sound of gears turning echoed beneath his feet. The warehouse beyond the gate was filled with herbs and spoils of war from past missions. NATO Run's team recognized the treasures and recalled the glorious days. Back when they carried out missions for the faction, they'd taken anything of interest from their enemies for a sense of accomplishment. They stored a lot of items here, but it's not everything. The other warehouses shouldn't be that far away. Should we ransack them too? No, that will alert the elders, NATO Run said. We'll be at a disadvantage if we're surrounded. Our cultivations are improving, but we're not there yet. Limit the valuables to this warehouse. His team worked fast. They searched the warehouse for herbs and valuables and put them away. Then they dragged the bodies of the guards inside and set the cave on fire. It wasn't a secret that the mountain was forbidden territory that belonged to the Mystic Covenant. The smoke and flames could be seen far and wide. The next morning, all kinds of rumors spread across the Haven domain. Stephen, Kim, and Fiona had been in a meditative state for the whole night. When they woke up, Ren was nowhere to be found. An accidental fire is an amateur mistake. The ancient cultivators must have attacked the mountain. Fiona didn't understand why Stephen was so concerned. We're not allowed to enter the forbidden area without permission. Why are you so worried? There are elders on the mountain, and the fire doesn't affect us in any way. The ancient cultivators are getting stronger, and the longer the faction stalls for time, the harder it'll be to win the war. We don't know how the faction will respond to the fire. They might decide to go back on their decision to take action and withdraw the team from the human realm. While they were guessing, a small and pink dragon appeared on Stephen's shoulder. Its adorable appearance made it look like a stuffed animal, and Fiona's heart melted. Is that one of your contracted beasts? It's cute. The iridescent dragon's eyes narrowed. I'm here for official business. I have first-hand information about the incident in the forbidden area. Do you want to hear it or not? Stephen thought the zodiac beasts were asleep in a spiritual world. When did the iridescent dragon wake up and trespass on the faction's forbidden area? The iridescent dragon guessed Stephen's thoughts and threw him an unimpressed look. Why would I risk my life and sneak onto a martial arts faction's forbidden area? This is a serious incident. The faction was attacked. Dragons are one of the most highly sought-after mounts, and most of the stronger cultivators have formed a contract with one of us. We're able to communicate through our spiritual worlds. How else would I know what happened? Stephen patted the iridescent dragon. Okay, so what happened last night? According to one of the elders' dragon's mounts, there were no clues at the scene. The cave had been ravaged by flames, and the bodies of 10 guards were found among the rubble. The identity of the culprit was unknown, but there weren't many people capable of bypassing the defensive arrays without alerting the elders. There were two possibilities. Either the ancient cultivators started the fire last night, or an insider had betrayed the faction. Ren and Tyrek had gone to the human realm to search for the culprit. The remaining elders were in the Elysian realm to investigate the faction for any suspicious individuals. Stephen was relieved that the iridescent dragon hadn't trespassed on the mountain. They would have become prime suspects. His worries were gone, but now it was Fiona's turn to be concerned. The City Lord challenge would take place in less than 3 months. If the faction sent her out on a mission because they didn't have enough manpower, there was no telling when she would be back. She needed to be here in time for the challenge. Kim mobilized her clone in the human realm for an update. She found Jace at the Aviation Bureau in Annapolis. He and the staff were swamped with work early in the morning. The staff was using satellites to search for the culprit on Warhawk's island of research institutes. Kim and Jace observed the island as the staff zoomed in until the shells on the beach appeared on the screen. Researchers in lab coats entered and exited through the institutes, but they didn't see the ancient cultivators anywhere. The expeditionary team was also in the room, staring intently at the screen. Where did they go? It's been so long since they appeared on the island. Did they leave the human realm? If they're not here, we should prioritize retrieving the meteorite, Kim suggested. The team agreed with her advice and set off for the island. The fire on the mountain had indirectly sped up their investigation. In half an hour, the expeditionary team could be seen on the screen with swords in hand. They unleashed a torrent of violent auras towards the meteorite. Their attack activated the defensive array the ancient cultivators had set up, and it blocked the storm. In the fight between cultivators, it was the unlucky civilians who were caught in the middle. The doors and windows of the nearest research institute shattered, and cracks appeared on the walls. The energy pipes caught fire, and the chemical storage containers started leaking. Ren and Tyrek had gathered the elite members of the expeditionary team to investigate the situation in the human realm. Even an array set up by ancient cultivators couldn't block all of the destruction. Parodi emerged from a crater in the meteorite. He'd been cultivating under Nadorun's orders. The expeditionary team launched a siege as soon as they saw him. Some of their attacks passed through the defensive array and struck the surface of the meteorite. The explosion wiped out half of the beach. Turbulent waves and a cloud of evaporating steam enveloped the island. Fragments of meteorite scattered over the sand. The ancient plants hadn't absorbed enough spiritual energy, and it was impossible for them to fight back. Kim reported the confrontation to Stephen. The battle is intense, but there's only one person from Nadorun's team on the island. The others aren't here. The rest of his team are probably the culprits behind the fire last night. Are you going back to the human realm to support the expeditionary team? No, there's only one ancient cultivator there. They can handle it. The Mystic Covenant had strict regulations. A large-scale operation had begun in the Haven domain. Nadorun's team had already left the domain and was heading to one of their many secret bases across the realm. They'd collected the herbs they needed, and the next step was to brew the strengthening liquid. The leaders of the Demon Hunter, Falcon, and Thousand Hands Guild were influential residents of the Haven domain. At this moment, they were gathered around a table at an inconspicuous tea house. Did you hear about the fire in the Mystic Covenant's forbidden area? The warehouse isn't that heavily guarded, but there are elders on the mountain. The culprit had to be an ancient cultivator. They've gotten stronger after escaping the holy ruins. I remember the Mystic Covenant surrounded them and drove them into a corner all those years ago. They were more miserable than the rats in the alleys, but now they're strong enough to attack the faction's warehouse without triggering the defensive arrays. The three of them fell silent as they picked up their cups and tasted the tea. They were thinking the same thing, but none of them voiced their thoughts. As the minutes ticked by, the Falcon Guild leader stood up, annoyed by their hesitation. I hate indecisiveness the most. If you two didn't call me here for something important to discuss, I'll be leaving first. The two men at the table stared at the Falcon Guild leader. She was a beautiful woman, and they couldn't take their eyes off of her. They shared a look and decided to come clean. The ancient cultivators are aiming to crush the Mystic Covenant completely, but they can't do it on their own. They need a partner. We are their best allies. We can provide intel, cover for them, and help them take down the faction together. In return, we'll ask the ancient cultivators to give us the formula for the strengthening liquid. After the ancient cultivators escaped the holy ruins, the existence of the strengthening liquid had spread across the realm. Every cultivator understood its value. There were even maniacs who planned to invade the faction and steal the formula, but so far, no one had succeeded. No cultivator would be able to resist the temptation of an indestructible body. The Demon Hunter and Thousand Hands Guild leaders paused, waiting for her to make a decision. They needed the Falcon Guild's help to find the ancient cultivators. After a moment, she sat down with a smile on her face. With our all-pervasive intelligence network, it's quite easy to find a couple of fugitives. The question is, how are we going to negotiate with them? Nadorun won't agree to give up the formula so easily. The faction's issued a mission about the culprit's whereabouts, the Thousand Hands Guild leader said. We'll give them the information they need. The Falcon Guild leader was confused. Whose side are you on? No one's. Our goal is the formula for the strengthening liquid. If we drive the ancient cultivators into a corner like what happened back then, they'll take the initiative to find allies. That's when we'll make our demands. The three of them came to an agreement and set their plan into motion. The first step was to use the Falcon Guild's intelligence network to search for the ancient cultivators. The Mystic Covenant had begun their search in the Haven domain. The faction's members were everywhere on the streets. Stephen and Fiona were among them. I doubt it's that easy to find them, Stephen said. They're not amateurs. The elders are busy. We need to put on an act, Fiona replied. If you ask me, this is a waste of time. You never do anything productive. I rarely see you cultivate. Why are you so concerned with wasting your time? I'm always busy, Stephen argued. The beasts have agreed to participate in the City Lord Challenge. We have less than 3 months to prepare. If any of them are injured or killed during the challenge, the Celestial Beast will have my head. Friendship be damned. As they turned the corner, they saw the Mercenary Guild's Alliance's headquarters up ahead. Their building was much more imposing than the Mystic Covenant's. On closer inspection, most of the buildings on the street belonged to the guilds. If Stephen and Fiona knocked on the door to ask the mercenaries if they knew where the ancient cultivators were, they would definitely be refused entry. Not even the elders would be able to get anything useful out of the mercenaries. A familiar middle-aged man walked past the gate. It was the advisor of the Thousand Hands Guild. Why is he here? Wasn't he in the human realm to expand the mercenaries' influence? Fiona asked. Maybe the battle between the expeditionary team and the ancient cultivator on the island was too intense, Stephen guessed. The mercenaries will be put in a difficult position if the Alliance security company is drawn into the conflict. We have evidence that the mercenaries are conspiring with the ancient cultivators. Should we capture the advisor and interrogate him? Stephen shook his head, exasperated. Please don't. He'd planted evidence to prompt the faction to take action. This was a sensitive time. If either the faction, mercenaries, or ancient cultivators found out, everyone's targets would shift to him. Little did he know that the Mercenary Guild's Alliance was planning to become allies with the ancient cultivators. The advisor had returned to the Elysian realm to deliver intel. After the expeditionary team invaded the island, Brody had engaged in battle for several hundreds of rounds before running off. As he fled, he broke the test tubes Nadorun had given him. The virus wasn't visible to the naked eye, and no one had noticed. The human realm would soon face a serious threat. A few days later, the Demon Hunter Guild leader led a team of mercenaries to the Mystic Covenant's headquarters. The emissaries welcomed them personally. What's so important that you had to come all the way here? Couldn't you have sent someone to deliver a message? I have something important to discuss with the higher-ups. The emissaries couldn't figure out what the mercenaries were up to. Their relationship had become tense ever since Fiona brought back evidence of their connection to the ancient cultivators, but they couldn't fall out completely just yet. When the emissaries took the mercenaries to the conference room, the Demon Hunter Guild leader handed them an envelope. There were a few photos of the ancient cultivators inside. For the safety of the Six Realms, we have a joint responsibility to hunt down the traitors. It just so happens that we came across their hiding place through our intelligence network. They're hiding in a small village in Seaflower City. It's in the Sky Domain. The Demon Hunter Guild leader watched the emissaries for their reaction. If the faction sent out their members to chase after the ancient cultivators, both sides would suffer losses. The emissaries reacted according to his expectations. This was a crucial piece of information, and they didn't have time to entertain guests. The three of them expressed their gratitude to the mercenaries, led them out of the building, and hurried back inside to find the elders. The Mystic Covenant moved out as soon as the emissaries informed them of the intel provided by the mercenaries. 2 elders gathered a team and headed to the Sky Domain. The emissaries were on standby at the headquarters, ready to send reinforcements. Entry-level members like Stephen and Fiona weren't qualified to participate, which meant they weren't restricted and could freely move from one city to another as long as they didn't interfere with the mission. "I'm going to follow them," Fiona said. "Do you know how dangerous that is?" Stephen asked incredulously. "The faction and the ancient cultivators are about to go to war." "I know. They're going to Seaflower City in the Sky Domain. It's too close to Minori City. When the battle starts, it'll attract cultivators from both cities. They'll want to help the faction defeat the ancient cultivators for a reward. I need to find a way to stop the cultivators in my city from joining in. If they're killed, our ranking will fall even more, and soon we'll be everyone's target." Fiona still had a glimmer of hope that they would somehow be able to raise Minori City's rankings in the short time they had left. Stephen had no choice but to follow her. Seaflower City was well known for its beautiful and unique flowers. Aside from their romantic value, they were valuable resources for medicinal pills. Nadorun had chosen to hide in a small village in the city with his team to make it more convenient to brew the strengthening liquid. Once the process was started, it would take several days to complete. Before they began, they had to make sure the area was safe to avoid wasting ingredients. Nadorun's team conducted a thorough search across Seaflower City and Minori City for an entire day before returning to the village at sunset. "We didn't find any suspicious individuals around us. The ancient plants on the outskirts of Minori City were dealt with before we arrived." Nadorun frowned. "Seeds of ancient plants are hard to come by. Who could have planted them?" There weren't that many factions with seeds like these in their possession. The Dragon Clan was one of them, but they wouldn't plant something so dangerous when the Elysian Realm was their home. Aside from their own team, who was plotting to destroy the realm? Nadorun's team didn't share the same concerns. "The more chaotic it is, the safer we'll be in the village. We can focus on brewing the potion." Nadorun didn't let down his guard because of a few comforting words. He closed his eyes and entered a meditation state. He had an uneasy feeling. When cultivators reached a certain level, their ability to sense danger was enhanced. They didn't need evidence to show the danger was lurking nearby. The 2 elders had made it to Seaflower City with their team 2 hours ago. They were hiding in their auras and waiting for night to fall. As the sky began to darken, the elders ordered their team to break the cauldrons and sink the boats. After that, they were to launch an all-out attack on the ancient cultivators. Nadorun sensed the rise in auras surrounding the houses. There really was someone hiding in the dark. Kill them all. The wooden houses were blown to pieces. Dust and debris settled over the village as weapons clashed. The expeditionary team was ruthless. Each strike targeted the vitals. The ancient cultivators fought back, but there was a trace of nervousness in their movements. They were heavily outnumbered. The 2 elders' target was Nadorun. They were determined to kill him once and for all. "You 2 haven't retired yet? Looks like the faction doesn't have anyone else to send out." Most of the elders of the Mystic Covenant stopped caring about the faction when their cultivations reached a certain rank to focus on breaking through to the next. The 2 elders lived on the mountain all year round. Their only job was to guard the warehouse. If it weren't for the fire, they wouldn't have been sent to the front lines. The 2 elders glared at Nadorun. "You started the fire, didn't you? Why are you making it sound like I'm some arsonist? When I was still a member of the faction, I gave up many of my team's spoils of war. I only took back what was mine." The elders didn't waste any more time talking. They lunged for Nadorun. Every time their strikes were about to land, he would step to the side and dodge. The buildings in the village crumbled as the residents fled for their lives. Both sides held a deep grudge against each other, and neither could be bothered to care about the damage to the city. The flood dragon was flying Stephen and Fiona to the Sky Domain. It had condensed a faint cloud of black mist to blend into the darkness. The senses of a beast were much sharper than cultivators. 20 miles away from Seaflower City, the flood dragon sensed a rush of aura drifting with the wind. If they went further, the aura would tear them to shreds. Stephen and Fiona had to continue their journey on foot. As they approached the city, they saw explosions lighting up the night sky. Nadorun and the 2 elders were eye-catching in the darkness. Their auras had condensed into a golden flame on their skin. "I can feel it from their auras," Fiona said. Those 3 are at the Starshine rank. Stephen recalled all the close encounters he'd had with the ancient cultivators. Nidoran either hadn't noticed him, wasn't there, or didn't pay him any attention. If he was caught, he would have died a gruesome death. Luck was the only reason he'd survived. Fiona looked around, searching for any reckless cultivators who were hoping to join the battle. There were quite a few of them. The commotion had alarmed cultivators in Seaflower City and Minori City. They'd rushed over and were hiding on the outskirts, waiting for their chance to strike. There are so many people who aren't afraid of death. You can't stop them all. They're here for money, Stephen pointed out. The city lords of Seaflower City and Minori City arrived at the same time. An enemy of the realm had appeared in Seaflower City. The city lord couldn't turn a blind eye. If he let destruction continue, the entire city would be destroyed. He leaped into the air and swept his gaze over the cultivators hiding on the outskirts. Leave if you're not involved in the conflict. If you jump into the fray, you'll be killed. The intimidation of a city lord was no joke. The cultivators were members of families that worked closely with him. Their businesses would fail if they got on his bad side. The cultivators disappeared one after another, leaving only the ancient cultivators and the Mystic Covenant behind. Nidoran scanned the faction members from the corner of his eye. He had a feeling that tonight's encounter with the faction wasn't coincidental. His team was either followed or their location was exposed. They weren't ready for an all-out battle with the Mystic Covenant. Nidoran transmitted his voice to the team, telling them to retreat when they saw an opportunity. On the surface, he looked brave and fearless with no intention of escaping. It doesn't matter how many of you there are. None of you have what it takes to wound me in the slightest. The city lord of Seaflower City took out an embroidered fan. You're arrogant for a traitor. Can you really get out of this unscathed when you're up against 4 of us? He flicked open his fan, and an ominous wind began to blow. Flower petals drifted with the breeze. Dante followed up with a restrictive domain in the form of a cube condensed form of inner energy. As the 2 elders and the 2 city lords set the stage, the aura in the area surged to unimaginable heights. Even Nidoran couldn't avoid their attacks completely. Bloody gashes littered his skin. If it were anyone else, their body would have been sliced to pieces. Despite his wounds, he maintained its composure and pointed the tip of his sword towards the sky. A ray of purple light shot into the darkness. The clouds parted, and the constellations shifted. A cluster of glowing lights flickered to life. The faction members and the city lords were bewildered by the strange scene. Stephen, who was hiding in the distance with Fiona, was the only one who'd seen this technique before. He grabbed Fiona's arm and took off running in the opposite direction. What's going on? Our side is about to win. Why are we running? The 2 cities are about to be destroyed. With our cultivation, we'll be killed in seconds if we stay. What do you mean? What did he do? He summoned a meteor shower. Stephen was all too familiar with this technique. He'd seen Liam use it twice, but now that he was on the receiving end, he could feel its terror. Fiona reached out with her aura to sense the situation in the sky. It was exactly like what Stephen had said. The cluster of glowing lights were meteors. Their energy was unstable, like they were being drawn to the city by an unseen force. The distance between them and the ground was rapidly decreasing. Why is everyone threatening Minori City? Is this the fate of our family? Now's not the time to get sentimental. Hurry up and run. As the shooting stars approached, the ancient cultivators took advantage of the distraction to run. Nidoran stayed where he was to ensure that the technique was completed. If it was interrupted midway, he would suffer a severe backlash. The city lords snapped out of their shock and flew toward the respective cities at high speed and transmitted their voices to every cultivator in the vicinity to set up a defensive array. They'd spent years developing their cities. They couldn't let their hard work or their people be turned to dust.